I'm Joe Ploof.
I'm Brian Cox.
We're at Hanging Hills Brewing Company in Hartford, Connecticut.
Hey all, Amanda here. Welcome to entry 68 of Great Beer Adventure. Today I have the first of 4 brief brewery bios that I captured on my way from Maine to New Jersey and back again. I had a podcast conference down that way and knew that it was going to be a long drive. So of course I decided to split up the driving with a few stops at some breweries. I left Maine shortly after 9:30 a.m. and hit my first stop in Connecticut around 1 p.m. The traffic wasn't so bad, but between needing to stop for gas for the ugly old minivan that I drive and ice for the beer cooler that's always in the back of it, it took me a little extra time than the good old Google Maps suggested it would. After putting on my specially designed one-man podcasting harness, I stepped into the first brewery. Before planning this trip, I knew nothing about Hanging Hills Brewing Company, so I asked them to tell me their origin story.
Story of Hanging Hills. Brian and I both went to the American Brewers Guild in Middlebury, Vermont. We were aspiring homebrewers who, like many brewers, at this point it's a cliche, but we were unhappy in our professions. Brian was a process metallurgist at AK Steel down in West Virginia, and I was a teacher. We both went to beer school and met in the summer of 2012. We were the graduating class that summer, and we rented a house with 14 guys in Sacramento. A bunch of us were East Coasters and Mid Coasters, so we drank our faces off. It was like Nick Cage and Leaving Las Vegas. There was all these beers that none of us had ever had before. But prior to drinking, I took the bus across country. My bus arrived at 5:30, and the only person awake in that early in the morning was Brian, and he unlocked the door and let me in. And this is the first time we had met. And we talked for about 2 hours about bad bosses. I was about to get married, so we talked about that, and we talked about how we didn't want to work for people anymore and how we had a lot of similar tastes in beer. And the seed was planted then. And we've been working on this project since then. But we started taking it seriously, as my wife will say, the following summer when Brian moved up here to take the head brewing job at Overshores Brewing. Brian could talk about that.
It also became more serious when we met Scott Stauffer, too. So we had this grand scheme of things that we wanted to do, but we needed to get organized financially and, as Joe was saying, take it seriously. And that's where Scott came in. He's our number 3 in this acting COO of our company.
And Scott actually hates having his name mentioned in these things. So if we could just keep saying Scott Stauffer's name and how much we respect all of the work that Scott Stauffer has put in, I think that would be good for Scott Stauffer. Don't you, Brian?
Yeah. Or we've also talked about doing a beer called the Stauff. It's a play off of the Hoff for David Hasselhoff. And instead of having the lifeguard rescue can on the shoulder, he's going to do a sixtel on his shoulder, empty, because he doesn't want to put a full one on his shoulder. But it might include some swim trunks if he's feeling sassy and we get him drunk enough. Well, usually it's those short red ones, not a full on Speedo, unless they're racing for some woman that
she's drowning in a sea of beer, and the only person who can save her is our hero, Scott Stauffer.
What a lovely segue into finding out a little bit more about the beers brewed at Hanging Hills.
Our 2 primary beers are the India Oat Pale Ale, or the IOPA. It's an IPA with a high proportion of oats in it. And then our YPA, or Yellow Pale Ale. Yesterday's IPAs are today's Pale Ales. Everything just keeps getting bigger. So those you'll see on a very regular basis. And then we've got some that will be here more often than others, such as Rain Man, our ESB, which is a extra special bitter, kind of a tip of the hat to the old English styles. We've also got Twain, our Golden Rye, and Garner, which is our Well Hop Stout. Those are the ones that will be around the most. And then we also have the black IPAs, the Saisons, and anything we kind of feel like making or drinking in the next couple of months. We're self-distributing right now. That's what Joe is. Joe is sales and distribution.
Marketing, sales, distribution. We just did 105th invoice last night, and we have about 45 customers. Many of them are repeating customers already. The Connecticut scene has been very welcoming to us, especially on the shoreline in New Haven. Hartford is still a developing market as far as craft goes, but I am fearless, and I will knock down every damn door until we are on draft in as many bars in this beloved city of ours as I can get on. I mean, the goal that we stated was that we wanted to be a New England player. So we wanted to be a regional brewery with a foothold, a small foothold in New York, and then just kind of moving north and east from the city. We want to saturate Connecticut and then move north towards Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. We may have a problem getting into Vermont. They seem to make some beer there. Apparently, there's a lot of breweries. I haven't been up to Maine enough to verify this, but Vermonters are fiercely, steadfastly loyal to their products. We're still going to try to get in there. You hear us, Vermont? We're going to get in there. At least one place. It may be like a one beer. It'll never come back on again, but we did one. That's the goal. One beer in Vermont. I could retire.
Now that you know a bit more about the brewery and the beers and their mission to tackle Vermont, let's find out a bit more about Joe and Brian via their first beer memories.
I mean, like, if you talk about the beers that got us into craft beer, my dad always drank really good beer, or, what seemed to be really good beer. Lots of German imports, Eyinger, he was big into that, and Spaten. But we would always go, my mom's originally from Cleveland, so when we go up to Cleveland, Dad would make a point to try to find some Great Lakes. So Great Lakes was my first American craft beer that I was around, and then Sierra for national brands, but I saw more of those than I did Great Lakes and Sierra more than I did Sam Adams or anything like that to start. My dad just wasn't a Boston beer guy, really.
So I don't really know. As far as first beer memories, like I definitely had like a handful of crafts, but I didn't really seek them out until I moved to just south of Seattle. I lived in Federal Way, Washington. And if you don't know where that is, it's because no one knows where Federal Way is. Although I think it's the 4th or 5th largest city in Washington state. But I went to a Safeway the first day I was there, and this was 2004. And I was like, holy cow. Not only is there like more than Sam Adams there's an entire wall dedicated to craft beer. And having lived in upstate New York pretty much my entire life up till that point, I knew that something was cooking up across the country that had missed where I had grown up. And that was my first time thinking that maybe beer didn't have to be just for the purpose of getting you drunk. And then I immediately bought the one with the prettiest label, and it was New Belgium's Fat Tire. I thought that was gorgeous. And so that was my first intentional purchase, I think, of craft beer. Even though I didn't even I think it was we just called it microbrewed beers back then. We didn't call it craft beer. Craft beer came a little bit later. But my first microbrewed beer was intentionally purchased was probably Fat Tire. Although there were probably drunken purchases at 2 a.m. in Saratoga of other beers on a dare. They were probably high in alcohol, so I was like, I gotta get that. It'll make me drunker.
On that note, make sure you check out Hanging Hills Brewing Company in Connecticut. I was lucky enough to try a couple of their brews and even brought home a growler to share with my husband. We were both very impressed. For links to all of their social media, be sure to hit up the show notes by going to greatbeeradventure.com/068. Join me next week as I learn a bit more about making a print magazine, and this little road trip series will be back in 2 weeks with a look into Yonkers Brewing Company. In the meantime, I would love to know your first beer memory. Share it in 140 characters or less by hitting me up on Twitter at GreatBeerADV. If you all, our fabulous co-adventurers, would like to support the show, check out our Patreon page. For less than the cost of a beer, you can show us some love. Go to greatbeeradventure.com/support. If you want to see even more from our adventures, follow us on Instagram at greatbeeradventure. And be sure to subscribe to the show. That way, you won't miss a thing. Great Beer Adventure is part of the Great Pint Society. Cheers.